When the Anbernic RG Slide was first announced, I was actually pretty excited. I'm sure most of us were. But once I saw what chipset it was rocking and the price tag, I told myself that I was gonna pass on this one. But because I love you all so damn much and I know that this is one a lot of you guys are gonna be curious about, I decided, wallet be damned, I'm gonna get one of these and talk about it. And after having it for about a good 2 solid weeks and playing the ever-loving crap out of it, I'm left with some pretty mixed emotions. On the one hand, I do enjoy playing this handheld, I really do. But while playing it, you can't help but feel this constant sense of disappointment. Anbernic was so close to making this thing awesome, it's right there. But you'll see what I'm talking about as we dig a little deeper. This is one of the better packaged Anbernic devices. They really seem to be stepping up the presentation here. Inside the box you have the RG Slide itself, a USB-C cable for charging and data transfer, a couple of thumbstick grips, some paperwork, and a screen protector inside. And you're definitely going to want to make sure to use this screen protector right out of the box. The screen is a completely flush surface of the handheld. There's zero bumps, grooves, and ridges serving as a barrier to protect it from the other objects floating around in your backpack or travel bag. Now I specifically made sure to say backpack and travel bag and not your pocket, because although this thing may look inspired by the PSPGo, it is huge in comparison. Here it is next to the PSPGo, and as you can see, it's a chunky boy. Matter of fact, here it is next to the HTC Dream, which is among the first and more bulky Android phones, and the RG Slide makes this thing look tiny. So needless to say, unless you're wearing some 90s Junko jeans or some cargo pants, you will not be comfortably walking around with this thing in your pocket. When it's all closed up like this, it might look like an oversized version of a burner phone that you would see at the checkout aisle of a CVS back in 2013. But these little nubs on each end next to the speakers are actually buttons that actually serve as menu access depending on what emulator or game you're playing. Might seem like small potatoes, but it's actually really convenient, and you'll often find yourself being thankful that it's there. Now let's talk a little bit about this slide mechanism. It's extremely satisfying. You'll be opening and closing this thing a million times. It has this very loud audible snap, which will have you questioning the durability of the mechanism. Fortunately, despite the entire handheld being made out of plastic, the rails and backplate seem to be made of metal, which is a good indicator that the slide mechanism should last the lifespan of the handheld. Maybe we'll see future iterations of the slide come in an all metal housing. That'd be really sharp. You have 4 face buttons, a directional pad, and 2 joysticks. The joysticks are capacitive and the buttons and D-pad are more the typical membrane press and not the tactile clicky style. And they all feel of really solid build quality. Topside, you have the horizontal side-by-side shoulder buttons, which I'm normally not a big fan of, but it actually works really well here. And these are actually the tactile clicky style. Over on the bottom, you have a 3.5mm headphone jack, a USB Type-C port for charge and data transfer, and a power indicator light. On the one side, you have the power button and the volume up and down, and on the other, you have the micro SD card slot. As I previously stated, the entire handheld is mostly made out of plastic, but it manages to not feel cheap, and the pets really seem to enjoy the way it smells for some reason. Now mind you, it doesn't have that premium build that you would see from Retroid or Neo, but it's got a considerable amount of weight to it and just overall feels solidly built. Spec-wise is where the honeymoon phase starts to come to an end with this thing. Under the hood, it's rocking a Unisoc T820. Which is not the worst chipset out there, it's just the same chip that Anbernic has been using for the past year or so. So from a performance standpoint, it's really not a step forward. It's going to be more of the same of what we've grown accustomed to seeing. Which is not the worst thing in the world, but for an asking price of $190 US, you would expect it to have slightly more beefy specs. Now a major redeeming quality of this handheld, and the absolute star of the show, is this gorgeous 4.7-inch LTPS display with 120Hz refresh rate. This thing is stunning and is one of the best non-OLED displays I've seen on one of these handhelds. It's got 8 gigs of RAM and a 5000 mAh battery. It's running Android 13 and similar to older Anbernic Android products, it can boot in both the default Android mode and Anbernic's front end. And speaking of Anbernic's user interface, I have handhelds that are almost 3 years old at this point and still use this same front end. Anbernic, if you're listening, it's time to mix it up. Now I've always credited them with being very straightforward and simple to use, and that's still the case here. But compared to what some of the competition is out there doing, it's time for an upgrade. Now jumping right in with some PSP, that was my biggest question mark. This thing is very obviously modeled after the PSPGo, but its screen is more tailor-made for 4x3 consoles and not so much 16x9. My concern was that PSP games would look scrunched or distorted in some way, But that wasn't the case, and every PSP game I played looked great. I was able to get away with 4x in some instances, but most games ran perfect at a 3x resolution. Only once I had to drop down to a 2x, and that was while playing God of War. But the RG Slide will handle most of your PSP games with relative ease. Switching over to PS2, the lighter stuff ran perfectly at a 2x resolution. Unfortunately, some of the more resource demanding games, you're going to have to lower it to a native resolution. And that's a little disappointing because this display is so beautiful, and I feel like you can't really enjoy it full effect when you have to downscale the resolution so much. The games are still playable and still look good, but this is where you start to wish that the processing capabilities of the handheld were a little higher end. Nonetheless, this thing will handle PS2, including most of the heavies, albeit at a reduced resolution. GameCube was pretty much the same as PlayStation 2, most games ran at a 2x resolution, but in some instances I did have to reduce it down to native. But most GameCube exclusives have a unique style all to themselves that isn't really lost in translation when you're forced to reduce the resolution. These games still look great. Dreamcast is another emulator that ran fantastic on here, and the games played phenomenal on this 120Hz refresh display. Now I'm going to talk about an emulator that a certain company hates whenever I bring up in any of my videos. I've had multiple videos flagged for this, so just know that if the video cuts out at this point and appears to be chopped, it's because I had to appease this certain company once again. 3DS is pretty hit or miss on the RG Slide. While some games seem to run pretty good, or are in the very least playable to a certain extent, other games you'll notice have weird artifacts or just some awkward graphical glitches occurring. On top of that, this display isn't really the greatest to play games that were designed for a dual screen handheld, but it's still nice to see that it has this capability if you wanted to toy around with it. PS1 played amazing and was capable of being played in full HD, and same with N64, including some of the more notoriously difficult games to emulate. And of course, all of your 8-bit and 16-bit games look and play amazing on here. That 120Hz refresh really does something to these older games, and I've never seen them look better. Being used as an Android device, this thing is top notch. Whether you're playing a horizontal or a vertical Android game, this display will adapt to everything, and is one of the better Android to handheld conversions I've experienced in the past few years. Hell, this might actually be the best I've experienced since the Nvidia Shield Portable. I'd have to really think on that. The problem is, this thing is kind of stuck in a technical limbo, and has one of the worst identity crises I've seen for one of these retro emulation handhelds. It resembles a PSPGo, but its display is more tailored for 4x3 consoles. It's got this gorgeous 120Hz display, but its processing limitations force you to play some games in native resolution. It's got an almost $200 price tag, but its performance is on par with some handhelds that are about a year old, and are very often on sale between the $130 to $150 price point. You can't help but ask yourself, who exactly was this made for? And am I paying for the novelty of it more than I am its capabilities? You figure about $50 more, and now you're starting to enter that Retroid and Ioneal territory, and those provide a much more premium experience than this does. All that being said, I still can't help but love the hell out of this thing. I haven't been able to put it down since I've gotten it, and it's so frustrating because I can't tell if it's due to nostalgia or if I genuinely like this handheld. It's amazing what a solid form factor will do in terms of enjoyment and playability. All in all, I really do feel like you're better off either waiting for the RG Slide 2 to come out with upgraded specs, or wait for this thing to drop in price and go on sale for about $150 or so. Hopefully this is just the beginning of things to come, and we see bigger and better sliding handhelds in the future. As always, if you guys are interested in the RG Slide, I will have links in the description below. Until next time, this is Ness, signing out.